Hello and welcome to the last Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily of the Summer Term, the podcast that wakes up just before 5 a.m. every morning to get the jump on British politics. It's Thursday, the 25th of July, and I have finally just turned off the daily alarm on my phone for the summer break.
My name is Jack Blanchard of Politico. With me, as you can hear, is Sam Coates of Sky News. And yes, apparently, according to Sam's show notes here, this is the 38th and final daily episode since we turned this into an every morning podcast back in May after Rishi Runak called the election. And it's been a joy, hasn't it, Sam? Is this it? Is this it? Is this actually it?
The term is not quite over yet. On Monday, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, is going to unveil the scale of the black hole she claims has been left behind by the Conservatives before Parliament breaks up on the Tuesday. But you're going to have to do all of that without us, because we're done. Jack, you're off on holiday pretty imminently. I crawl off on holiday at the back end of next week. Going to lie flat on your back?
Yeah, sorry everyone who wanted us to preview Monday's doom statement from Rachel Reeves, but you're going to have to do it without us. Let me just preview it for you. Everything's terrible. Everything's broken. Britain hasn't got any money. Oh, and sorry, your taxes are probably going up after all. Sorry, everyone. Sorry about that. Now we're going away for the summer break. That's that bit done. Yes, no, I'm afraid my holiday was already booked before Labour decided to extend the parliamentary term, and there's absolutely no way I wasn't taking my kids away. So we're doing that. We're doing that on Saturday, and yeah, the listeners are just going to have to manage without us. But not forever, right? This isn't the last ever episode. You're not saying goodbye to me. I'm not going to have to get through the mornings just with my family to talk to, am I, Sam?
No. Before you know it, we will be back with everything you could possibly want from us back in the autumn. Because, as you guessed it, it is set to be a massive season in British politics, so we wouldn't want to do that without you. And after we've been lying in a darkened room, different darkened rooms, to be absolutely clear, for a few weeks, fear not, our batteries will be back on full charge the moment that term begins. I sometimes at this point feel a little bit like an iPhone battery. The phone still works even though the battery says 4%, but it is in danger of completely turning off, dead. If we keep going too much.
It's just not true.
Too much.
Sam Coates has absolutely one energy level, and it is extremely high. There is absolutely no other version of Sam Coates than this one that I see every morning.
No, I'm agreeing with you. I'm just saying, we still do the energy level even when the battery's at 3%, 2%, and then suddenly it just keels over. If you had to single out a highlight or two of the last few weeks, Jack?
Oh, gosh. I thought the election morning episode was pretty good fun. I remember it was the weirdest night. I was up at the Politico watch party. I was desperately working really hard while everyone around me was drinking, and we were working on our stories. I went to bed for a few hours. I got up. I was editing our London Playbook email frantically right up to the last minute. It was just about to go at 6:30 in the morning. We pressed send. Hooray, we've done it. And I thought, there, my work is done. And then you texted me and said, where are you? You're supposed to be making a podcast. And I was like, oh yeah, I do the podcast thing. And ran downstairs and we just started jabbering at each other about what had just happened. I can't remember a single moment of that at all, but I vaguely remember Liz Truss losing her seat in the middle of the episode, which was kind of, frankly, right. Hilarious.
So your highlight is forgetting the podcast.
Yeah, sorry.
I think my highlight was halfway through a sentence about something to do with Keir Starmer and a naked man appearing at the window opposite, yeah. and then me saying so, and then me also remembering that there are people that listen in Hither Green and suddenly worrying that they were going to tell said neighbour and just that we would be ostracised by the neighbours. It was just an awkward moment, and I wish I hadn't opened my mouth. Anyway, sorry everybody who lives around here. Sorry to the neighbours yesterday for waking you up. Anyway, we better get on with the podcast. Just before we get to what we're going to talk about today, I just checked the Parliament website because after Keir Starmer suspended those 7 Labour MPs, Keir Starmer now has a different majority. He did win an election majority of 180. Keir Starmer's majority is now 166. So that's the number you need to remind yourself. The government has a majority in the Commons of 166. Still pretty big, but it's different. So I thought I'd mention that. What are the 3 things that we're going to talk about today?
The big thing today is GB Energy. Labour's first big policy play is being unveiled today. Ed Miliband is touring the broadcast rounds. Keir Starmer's making a big speech in the north of England. We'll be talking a lot about that. The Tory leadership contest remains at number 2 in our list. Well done, Tories. Tom Tugendhat today becomes the second Tory MP after James Cleverly to formally announce he is running. And we'll do some American news as well, because overnight Joe Biden gave his long-awaited address to the nation where he explained why exactly he is not going to be standing in the presidential election in November the 4th. And of course, American news is going to dominate things over the next few weeks in August while we are not on air. So we better talk about that as well, Sam.
But should we start with GB Energy?
Yeah, Prime Minister's headed to the northwest of England this morning. He's going to be making a speech around 11, half 11, something like that, talking about clean energy and GB Energy, which is the company that is being set up by the new Labour government to draw investment in and to help drive through big green energy projects towards what is without doubt the hardest thing that Labour has promised it is going to do, the biggest pledge, by far the most complicated thing, which is to basically give Britain a completely clean energy supply by 2030. It's an incredibly stretching target. Not many experts in the field think it's possible, but it is their one big policy pledge that looked really ambitious that they did not row back on in any way during the election campaign, and they've now got 5.5 years to try and deliver it. And GB Energy is going to be a key part of that. They're setting up a publicly owned company that is going to invest and draw investment into clean power projects, and today they're announcing a partnership with the Crown Estate, which essentially owns the seabed, I think, around the country, and is King Charles owns the seabed, is that right? I think that's basically true. And they're going to be leasing parts of it to build wind turbines to try and drive this clean energy revolution, as they want to call it, through. What do you make of it, Sam? It's a big deal, this, isn't it?
It's a very big deal, and as you say, it's one of the most contentious things this government will do. You note the leading article in the Times today, which calls the government's target of decarbonising the grid by 2030 delusional and reckless. And whilst lots of people will disagree potentially with that, it shows you that the stakes are high. You're right to say that this plan is complicated. It's super complicated. It is a big step of the government getting kind of involved in areas that the private sector have taken much more of the lion's share of the lead on in the past. The headline that you're going to see everywhere in the papers is about thousands of offshore wind turbines. The way that's going to come about is that GB Energy is, in a sense, going to do a couple of things. And they're things that the government thinks the private sector cannot do. The first is to sort of basically do all the stuff in preparation for different types of power generation. So it's going to get land, it's going to get seabeds, what one charity calls, Nesta calls, shovel ready. So it's going to sort out the planning, the grid connections, the environmental surveys, so that all you have to do then, all GB Energy has to do then, is auction these plots of land onshore or under the sea to the private sector to build and operate the power systems. And then secondly, it's going to kind of co-invest in power generation, either because that project isn't necessarily going to get off the ground otherwise, so it's too risky an investment for the private sector to do that, which is an interesting choice. Some people will see a downside in that, or because actually some of these projects will be quite profitable, and the taxpayer wants to, and they want the taxpayer to get a share of it. But at the heart of it is this tie-up with the King. Now, we sort of got a sniff of this in the King's speech, because there is a bill, a Crown Estate bill. And what that does, what they're doing, although we joke about it being owned by the King, really it's answerable to the Treasury. And the big thing is, alongside the nearly £9 billion that the government's giving GB Energy, it is also giving the Crown Estate the ability to borrow money. Now, I think that's the thing that some of those involved thinks gives this real legs. But ultimately, it comes down to borrowing. And ultimately, there'll be questions about where that sits on the government balance sheet. But that legislation in the King's speech to effectively sort of give the Crown Estate more borrowing powers is the thing that they think will really ramp up projects. We will see if that's right.
Yeah, there's a couple of things about this. First is that these sort of plans for lots and lots of offshore wind turbines around, the North Sea and other parts off the coast, they're not actually new. Britain has long planned to build zillions of offshore wind turbines in these areas. What we're talking about here is essentially a different mechanism for doing it, and what Labour says will be a much quicker mechanism for delivering that, allowing them to hit this target much sooner than the previous government had said and many experts thought possible, and it remains to be seen whether that's true. But the mechanism for getting there is complex.
In every 2 to 4. So I was going to say 2 to 4 years is the target to build wind turbines, and at the moment they take 10 to 15. Now that's a hell of an acceleration if it's going to work.
Indeed. The other thing this is, though, of course, is a branding exercise, and I think a pretty smart one, and an interesting one too. What Labour are trying to do is put a big shiny Union Jack, and indeed now a crown as well for good measure, on these big wind turbine projects, and try and make them a sort of patriotic endeavour. Try and give people a sense that this is a collective British thing that we're trying to do, and see if they can get some sort of public buy-in for green energy infrastructure in a way that we've just never had before. The narrative around this stuff in the past has often been about blight, and people don't like the way they look. The whole narrative about wind turbines for years has been sort of negative in the press, and they're trying to turn it into something very different. As I say, sort of a British patriotic thing. It's all very Morgan McSweeney, Keir Starmer's advisor, who loves to try and talk about patriotism as a positive for Labour, and it's fascinating to see whether that can be done. No one's ever really tried that before. And the other thing it strikes me as well, Sam, is making a case for public ownership and public ownership in projects. Nobody's done that in a British government for an incredibly long time, not in my lifetime as far as I can remember back. When things have been nationalised in the past, it's always been because of some crisis. I remember the Tories nationalising rail lines when they failed, and Gordon Brown nationalising the banks when they failed. Railtrack, remember that back in 2002, it failed. This is a government actually making a case for public ownership and public investment in projects in a way that we just haven't really heard very much before, and it just feels like a real sea change, if you'll excuse the pun, in the narrative in that way too.
That's right. I mean, there is a branding exercise. GB Energy stickers on wind turbines all over the place. Didn't work so well for the European Union. They used to brand all their projects, and it didn't exactly necessarily foster a great deal of love before the Brexit referendum. But as you say, it's this shift towards a greater involvement of the state in stuff. Just imagine the role that the head of GB Energy is going to play. They're going to have to be as good as pension fund managers in working out what to invest so there aren't big losses for the taxpayer, whilst also, because they'll have a stake in power generation companies, they're going to have to sort of know whether or not the sort of industry, the energy industry, is doing the right thing, is managing its offerings to customers well. It feels to me like an almost impossible job to run this company that's got so many different functions. And I think the pressure on the leadership and the leader of GB Energy over the next 5 to 10 years is going to be absolutely immense, because it feels like a brain-bustingly difficult job that's about to be created.
That's absolutely true. And there's a lovely line in this morning's Playbook email. Stefan, who wrote it, has seen a briefing booklet on GB Energy, which says the company will, quote, own, manage and operate clean power projects while also bringing in private sector. And GB Energy will be, quote, wholly owned by the Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero. So Ed Miliband gets to own GB Energy. He is going to love this. It's like the ultimate train set for Ed Miliband. All those years in opposition, all those awful bacon sandwich moments. It's all over for you now, Ed. You get your great big green energy company to play with, and he must be having a wonderful time back in government.
Right, we haven't got long because we spent so long on that. Let's just touch on the Tories. Tom Tugendhat, unsurprisingly, has launched his leadership bid today. Everyone's going to launch it by Monday, and by the end of the parliamentary term next week. The thing that is a surprise, something of a surprise, is that he has signalled he is going to do something that mainly those on the right had wanted, which is that he's saying he is willing to leave the European Convention of Human Rights as part of his pitch. He said that if overseas institutions, make it harder for Britain to control its borders, then we should exempt ourselves from them or leave their jurisdiction. Tugendhat, I say it will be seen by many as a surprise, but it's not entirely. Tugendhat has always had a slightly more nuanced view than some in the One Nation wing that he comes from about international relations, because that's his background as a former soldier. During all the Brexit years, he never sort of signed on in quite the same way to, for instance, staying in the customs union, unlike many of his fellow kind of Remain voting One Nation supporting colleagues. And we are told that the reason that he has shifted his position somewhat is because he saw the way that, for instance, the ECHR was getting involved in Switzerland, kind of basically started interfering in the way that Switzerland is tackling or failing to tackle carbon emissions, and was the Swiss government was being challenged under human rights law on that. So he is making a case to try and appeal to the right of the party at a moment where you've got to think that unless Mel Stride comes storming through, he's getting increasing amounts of momentum behind a campaign with a solid backing from those on the kind of centre wing.
Yeah, he's a pretty interesting figure, Tom Tugendhat. He's obviously run for the leadership before, and he does perform well in those debates. He did better than people expected the last time, although he was never going to win it. The mood the Tory party was in then when Liz Truss was chosen. He's got his great backstory as a soldier. He can speak well, as you say. He's a centrist candidate, and he's now showing a little bit of ankle to the right, as a centrist candidate needs to do if they're going to win this. Although I do actually think his position on the ECHR is essentially Rishi Sunak's position on the ECHR, which obviously didn't absolutely endear the Tory grassroots last time. But anyway, if someone is going to come through in this contest and quote unquote do a David Cameron, someone who's not been a big senior cabinet minister before is going to come through from the centre and unexpectedly win, then I guess that figure would need to be Tom Tugendhat. I'm not totally convinced it's possible to win to win a Tory leadership contest as the centrist candidate. I assume in the end we will get one broadly centrist candidate and one broadly right-wing candidate, and the right-wing candidate wins. But who knows? When the contest goes this long, it is all up for grabs. It's very hard to predict how it's going to play out, and he's got as much chance as anyone of getting into the final two. I would think he's sort of fighting with James Cleverly for that centre ground position, right?
But he doesn't have... I suspect James Cleverly will be weighed down by his staunch backing of Rishi Sunak, whereas Tugendhat was always, even though he was in the Sunak cabinet, had always a more prickly relationship with Sunak. Of course, Tugendhat backed Liz Truss, which does give him a different dimension.
Is that a good thing? Does that help now?
If it helps you win the leadership, I suspect it might be, but other versions of history are available. But I don't think you could say that Tugendhat was intimately associated with the key decisions of the Sunak premiership, perhaps in the way that Cleverly was. So we will wait and see on that. Shall we pivot very quickly onto all the events overnight?
Just one very quick more thing on the Tory leadership to note. Victoria Atkins, the Shadow Health Secretary, has ruled herself out of the Tory leadership contest. She's written a piece in the Telegraph saying, I am not running in the Conservative Party leadership election. And she says, it has never been my intention to run in this contest. Hasn't it? Okay, I'm not sure I'm totally buying that one based on various briefings we've been getting over the last few weeks, but she's obviously decided she can't win now, so she is not going to be in it. So it looks like we will probably get the 7 contenders we were expecting in this. Yes, let's just talk very briefly about America, because Joe Biden gave a televised address overnight, the one we've been waiting for since he tweeted that he wouldn't be standing in the US election in November. After all, he said he's going to be passing the torch to a new generation, and that he's done the right thing because for the sake of democracy, we need a new candidate. I revere this office, the president said, but I love my country more. He said he wants to finish the job for the American people, and he also said actually he was quite capable and deserves a second term. But I think, as I was saying the other day, he has accepted he can't win based on what has happened to his polling numbers since that fateful election debate of a few weeks ago. So a big moment for him, and I think we can safely say that in the few weeks we are off air, Sam, and before the start of September, American politics is probably going to dominate things while British politics takes a breather after the next few days.
That's right. The thing that came across to me from the clips I've seen of Joe Biden's address is he just didn't look happy. But in doing the speech in the way that he did, he was effectively making the case for why he needed to go. He doubled down on his election argument of last time, saying it was an even more important election than any other. Democracy is at stake, and in doing so, that kind of explains why reluctantly he's had to do what he did. We now have two leaders who have no political future, who are going to have to stay in place for months and months and months. We should continue to compare Joe Biden and Rishi Sunak as they are held semi-hostage in their jobs as party leaders for the next 100+ days. Well, I never feel sorry for them, but it will be amusing to compare and contrast.
It will, and the US election moving so quickly that when we come back at the start of September with this podcast, whatever it is, the 1st or the 2nd of September, I've forgotten, goodness knows what's going to have happened in that race. I mean, probably it'll still be Kamala Harris against Donald Trump at that stage, but honestly, who knows? It's the most crazy election campaign I've ever seen, and we've still got 3 and a bit months of that to go. So I'm pretty sure when this podcast returns in the autumn, we're still going to be talking an awful lot about American politics as well as British politics. So, sorry about that, but not much we can do.
No apology necessary. Right, that's it. It's all over for now. I can't believe I'm not going to see you for, at this time in the morning for some weeks. But perhaps that's a good thing.
I think it probably is. I think everyone's probably heard enough of us for a few weeks. Please have a wonderful summer. We will look forward to tuning in again at the start of September. Keep the podcast wherever you keep it in your podcast feed, and we will be back before you know it.
We will see you in September. Cheerio.